In this lecture, we're going to be taking a look at how we can design an idle animation for our fantasy characters. All right, so to begin this lecture, I'm going to start by grabbing a character that we created to actually create our animations from. So the character that I'm choosing to use is the platformer style fighter character that I created in a previous lecture. So I've opened up my character file, and the first thing I want to do is just to delete this second frame because we don't need an alternative cosmetic look to our character. Now the next thing that I will do is I'm going to right click on the costume layer or the layer above, and I'm actually going to merge this down. So if I merge this down, we now only have one layer, meaning that this is the final look for our character. So I can move it around and it will move everything on our scene. We no longer have two different separate layers. Now, before you move into actually doing any kind of animation, we don't want to slave over this file, as you may want to keep the character that you've already created for a separate purpose. So what I'll do is I'll come up to the top left here, I'll click on File, and I'm going to go down to Save As. I don't want to click Save because then we're going to overwrite the image we've already created. I want to go to Save As, and we will name this something else. So I can name this something like Character Idle. I'm going to click OK, and now it's going to save this as a separate file so we don't overwrite the image that we've already created in the past lecture. Now, for an idle animation, we want to keep it very simple, and the way that we can do this is by creating a 4-frame looping animation. So just like we did in the last lecture, we're going to click on this number 1 tab here, and I'm going to press Alt-N and do that 3 times so we can have 4 frames of animation. So what does our idle animation actually look like? Well, for this character, and because of the size that we are working with, I want to create an idle animation where our character is just breathing in place, slightly moving his arms and legs to show that our character is in motion. I'd like to start by setting up how our character is actually going to function or look from a position standpoint. So what we can do is grab our selection tool by pressing M, and I'm going to select over the entire head of our canvas. Just make sure that you are selected on the second tab here, as our first frame and our third frame are technically already complete. These are what I call the stationary frames, where no movement is actually occurring because our character is transitioning back to its original state. So on the second frame, this is going to be our breathing in motion, where our character gains a little bit of height and moves his arms slightly out. So I'm going to grab this entire head and the neck of our character, and you can actually increase the selection size that you're working with by holding down Shift and left click and dragging. And what that is going to do is it's going to actually add to our selection. I'm going to press this again, and I will highlight over both arms of our character. And I'm just going to move this entire image up 1 pixel. Now this adds an entire pixel height to our image, which will exaggerate our character's breathing motion slightly. However, once we've actually filled in the rest of the space, this will look a lot more appropriate to a character actually taking a breath in and breathing out. Now I'm going to grab this front hand and I'm going to move it 1 pixel to the left. And I'll do the same thing with the back hand and move it 1 pixel to the right. So once we have that in place, we have the actual positioning of our end product. Clearly, there is still a lot going on here, but we're just trying to get the initial concept down before we begin actually filling in the rest of our image. Now what I'll do is I'm going to come down to this 4th frame here, and we're going to do a little bit of the opposite. So what I'll do is I will grab the head again, just selecting the entire scarf area by Shift dragging this as well. Now I'm going to move this 1 pixel down and 1 pixel to the right. The reason that I'm moving this in this way is I'm kind of trying to create the opposite effect of the breathing in when I'm creating the breathing out motion. Now, as far as the hands are concerned, we don't want as much movement happening in this frame. So what I'll do is I will select the entire back hand except for the pixels closest to the body and shift the entire image left 1 over, so that we're actually cutting off more of the hand as it's appearing behind the torso and the legs of the character. Let's do the exact same thing, but with the other front hand, and move the entire hand in one as well. So there is a lot of overlapping pixels that distort our image. However, if we were to play this animation right now, we actually have something that kind of resembles our end result. Now, how do we get from this unfinished prototype of an animation to an actual finished animation? So all I want to do is wherever we have a piece of the body that we need to fill in, I'll start with the basic color that is needed. So I'm going to use this shadow color and just highlight all the way around wherever I see we need some kind of skin color, and I'll do the same thing for all of the other material types. Now we don't need this blue pixel here as it did get moved over from the selection tool, so I'm just going to erase that. And finally, I will finish off this glove piece. I do think we need slightly more of the arm showing, so I'm going to extend this entire canvas out on a diagonal line. Now quickly, I will just finish off the outline. And our drawing should look something like this. There are a few spots that we could highlight. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight the top half of this image, and I will actually extend the torso up a full frame entirely, and just making sure that we have no overlap from the arm to the chest. We're just about done with this frame. The last thing I'll do is I'm going to come back to my lighter skin color, and I just want to highlight one more pixel as we want to show that the shoulder is protruding out and away from the body. So there we have our most complicated frame of filling in the excess space. But basically, if we go back to the first frame, we'll notice that we're keeping a lot of the rules the same. You'll notice that the light piece of the front arm compared to the torso has no overlapping lighter pixels. And so returning back to the second frame, we'll see that we have the same effect. We have the dark pixels separating the light part of the torso and the front arm. It's rules like this that you'll have to find throughout your animation that you want to keep consistent to keep a proper proportioned image. Now, personally, I do think that this hand looks as if it is a little bit too large. So I'm actually going to extend the outline 1 pixel to keep this circular proportion to the hand. The arm could use a little bit more space as well. So now it's replicating a lot more of what the front arm looks like as well. Now, as I said before, the third frame is totally fine as we're coming back to our original state. But if we move to the fourth frame, we'll notice that again, we do have some of these overlapping pixels that I talked about before. And so again, one of my biggest rules is I don't want the light from the front arm to be in contact with the light in the torso. So I will just dot a pixel in front of the front arm. So I'm actually going to extend the front arm entirely over the actual glove component of the arm. To me, this looks pretty good. However, if we play the animation, something that we can see that is missing is there is absolutely no movement going on in the legs on our idle state. Normally this is fine because we don't really want to move around the position of our legs, as we don't want our character to seem as if they are changing their position if you're using this for something like a video game. So if we pause the animation, all we have to do is on this fourth frame, we can just slightly change the actual position of our leg by quite literally just adding 1 pixel to our knee and grabbing our dark pixels and getting rid of some of the highlight to this area. Now, because our hand is also in front of a lot of the pants, we can actually get rid of this pixel as well to just slightly change up our silhouette so we have more opportunity of changing around our sprite image. Now, if I play this animation, we can see that we have a little bit of movement in our leg, and honestly, that is good enough to symbolize our leg slightly swaying. And there we go. That is a finished idle animation. So pretty much when I am redesigning my animations for other characters, I'll start with taking the base clothing, starting with the head, and overlaying on top the extra costume aesthetics. And then it's easy to just simply recolor around the clothing and add any kind of extra accessories that the character has based on the orientation of the sprite. That's pretty much all you need to do to create different characters for your animations. And now we can head into the wrap up. That's pretty much all we have to do to create a basic idle animation. It shows a lot of movement without adding any kind of detail. So I hope you learned something about animating an idle state. I hope you're looking forward to creating more animations for our characters.